They called me a poor return at their own dinner table. 2 years later, I was the one deciding whether they could walk through the door. The champagne was too cold. I remember that detail because the glass had condensation running down onto my fingers, and I was holding it tighter than necessary, watching 2 security guards block the entrance like a quiet, immovable wall. The ballroom at the Langford Hotel was glowing, soft amber lighting, a live quartet near the stage, a 20-foot LED screen looping my company's logo in clean white lettering, Voss Logistics Group, Annual Partners Gala. 212 guests. 48 corporate accounts represented. Months of planning, contracts, confirmations, everything precise. And then, right at the entrance, something imperfect. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," one of the guards said, calm but firm. "This is a restricted guest list event." I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I recognized my mother-in-law's voice immediately, tight, strained in a way I had never heard before. "Please," she said, quieter this time. "You don't understand. We're family." Family. That word landed in the room like it didn't belong there. I set my glass down on a passing tray without looking and started walking toward the entrance. My heels made that soft, controlled sound against the marble floor, measured, steady. The kind of walk you learn when people are always watching you, even when you pretend they're not. As I got closer, I saw them clearly for the first time in 3 years. My father-in-law stood slightly behind her, shoulders stiff, jaw set like he was holding something back. My ex-husband, Daniel, was there too. Same posture. Same silence. But they didn't look the same. There's a specific kind of look people get when certainty leaves them. When the version of reality they've been living in starts to slip. They looked smaller. One of the guards noticed me approaching. "Ms. Voss," he said, stepping slightly aside. "Are these guests on your list?" 3 sets of eyes turned toward me at once. For a moment, no one spoke. I took in the details automatically, the way I always do, the creased cuffs on Daniel's shirt, my mother-in-law's grip tightening around her handbag, the faint sheen of sweat along my father-in-law's temple despite the winter air outside. "I just need 5 minutes," she said, stepping forward. "Elena, please." Not, "We need to talk." Not, "Can we fix this?" Please. That was new. And that should have been enough to make me feel something. It didn't. Because I remember another night. Different room. Different tone. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." That's what she had said to me, standing in her dining room, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair like she was negotiating a contract. "We're just being realistic. Daniel has a future to think about." I remember the exact sound of my suitcase zipper closing that night. The quiet click of it. The way no one stopped me. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. I looked at the 3 of them now, standing at the entrance to something they weren't allowed into, waiting for my permission like it was currency. And in a way, it was. The guard was still waiting for my answer. "Yes or no, ma'am." I held his gaze for half a second longer than necessary, then shifted mine back to them. 3 years ago, they decided I wasn't family. Tonight, they couldn't even get past the door. I exhaled slowly. "No," I said. "My name is Elena Voss. I'm 34 years old, and I run a logistics optimization firm based out of Chicago. On paper, it sounds clean. Stable. Intentional. 3 years ago, it didn't look like that at all. Back then, I was working out of a one-bedroom apartment on West Belmont, second floor, radiator that clanged every 40 minutes like it had something to prove. I had a folding desk, a used Dell monitor I bought for $120 off Craigslist, and exactly $3,800 left in my business account after covering software licenses and my first contractor. I wasn't unemployed. I wasn't careless. I was early. There's a difference, but it's invisible to people who only understand finished outcomes. I had spent 4 years prior working in supply chain analytics, mid-level role, decent salary, stable trajectory. I understood freight inefficiencies, contract leakage, routing failures. I knew exactly where companies were losing money and why. What I didn't have yet was scale. So I left. Quietly. No dramatic announcement. No safety net beyond 6 months of savings and a spreadsheet that mapped out exactly how long I could survive if nothing worked. That's when I met Daniel. He was polished in a way that made people comfortable immediately, tailored suits, easy confidence, the kind of man who knew which fork to use without looking down. We met at a mutual friend's dinner, talked about work, about growth, about Chicago's ridiculous winter. He said he admired what I was building. That should have been my first warning sign. Because Daniel didn't just come alone. He came with a system. His family wasn't just well off. They were structured around money. Everything was measured, categorized, evaluated, investments, relationships, even conversations. His father ran a private equity firm with 2 other partners. His mother managed what she liked to call the social architecture, charities, events, connections that looked like generosity but functioned like leverage. And Daniel? Daniel was the extension. The heir to something already built. At first, they were polite. That very specific kind of politeness that feels like approval until you listen closely. What exactly does your company do? His mother asked me the first time we had dinner at their house. Logistics optimization, I said. Mostly contract restructuring and route efficiency for mid-size distributors. She smiled. Small. Controlled. So, consulting. It wasn't a question. It's more scalable than traditional consulting, I replied. We build systems clients continue to use. She nodded like she understood. She didn't. His father was quieter but more direct. And revenue? Not significant yet, I said. I'm reinvesting everything. Another nod. This one slower. I remember the exact number on the receipt that night. $312 for dinner. Daniel paid without hesitation, barely glancing at it. I noticed because at that point, $312 was almost a week of my living expenses. Different worlds. That should have been manageable. What I didn't realize yet was that to them, I wasn't just from a different world. I was a variable. And variables, in their family, were either controlled or removed. At first, it didn't feel like hostility. That's the part people don't understand when they ask why I stayed as long as I did. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was controlled. Polished. Delivered with a smile that made you question your own reaction. It started with small things. Dinner invitations that came with conditions. We're keeping it intimate, my mother-in-law would say over the phone. Just close family and a few partners. I would show up anyway because Daniel insisted and spend the evening listening to conversations I wasn't meant to be part of. Investment strategies, acquisition targets, tax positioning. Numbers moved across the table like currency, and every time I tried to contribute, the topic would shift just slightly out of reach. Not enough to call it out. Just enough to remind me I didn't belong in it. One night, about 6 months into our marriage, his father leaned back in his chair and said, "Daniel's next move should be equity-based. Salary caps you." Daniel nodded. I asked a simple question. Equity in what sector? A pause. Not long. Just long enough. "We'll circle back to that," his father said, already turning to someone else. That was the first time I recognized the pattern. It wasn't that I was being excluded accidentally. It was deliberate. Then came the financial moments. Subtle but surgical. We went out for dinner with 2 of Daniel's cousins, someplace downtown where the menu didn't list prices next to certain items. I ordered carefully. $28 pasta. Water, no wine. When the bill came, Daniel's mother said, "Let's just split evenly. It's easier." I remember doing the math in my head. 8 people. $640 total. My portion $80. Not devastating. But unnecessary. Daniel glanced at me briefly. Not to check if I was okay, just to register whether I'd object. I didn't. That was the mistake. Because once you accept something like that quietly, it becomes the baseline. After that, it escalated. Comments started slipping in, always framed as concern. "You're working so hard," his mother said once, placing a hand lightly on my arm. "I just hope it turns into something sustainable." Sustainable. As if I was running a hobby. His father was less delicate. "At some point, Elena, you have to decide whether this is a business or an experiment." I met his eyes when he said it. "It's a business." He gave a short nod. "Then it should behave like one." That line stayed with me longer than it should have. Because what he meant wasn't about performance. It was about proof. And in their world, proof only counted when it was visible: revenue statements, assets, returns. Not projections. Not systems. Not potential. By their metrics, I was underperforming. Which meant I was becoming a liability. The shift with Daniel was slower, but more damaging. At first, he defended me in small ways. "She's building something," he'd say. "She's smart. Give it time." But over months, that language changed. From defense to distance. "I just think they're worried," he told me one night, sitting at the edge of the bed, not looking at me. "They want stability for us." Us. That word started sounding different. I remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't just being judged. I was being evaluated. It was during a Sunday brunch at their house, 12 people, long table, polished silverware that no one actually needed. His mother was talking about a family friend's daughter who had just married into a real estate group. "Now that's alignment," she said, smiling as she stirred her coffee. 2 people building in the same direction. Then she looked at Daniel. Not at me. At Daniel. "You have to think long-term," she added. It wasn't advice. It was positioning. That was the moment everything shifted for me. Because I understood something clearly for the first time. This wasn't about whether they liked me. It was about whether I qualified. And in their system, I didn't. It happened on a Thursday night in late October. I remember the date because I had just signed my third client that week, a regional distributor out of Milwaukee. $18,500 contract, 3-month optimization cycle. It wasn't massive, but it mattered. It meant my model worked outside of theory. I almost didn't go to dinner that night. Daniel said it was important. Just show up, he told me. It's a small thing. My parents are hosting a few people. A few people turned out to be 14. The dining room was set like a formal event, place cards, polished glassware, catered food laid out in courses. 2 of his father's business partners were there. A couple I didn't recognize. 1 attorney I'd seen once before. This wasn't dinner. It was a room with witnesses. I took my seat halfway down the table. Daniel sat beside me, already engaged in conversation before I had even unfolded my napkin. The first 30 minutes were predictable updates, investments, market talk. I stayed quiet, listening, tracking patterns the way I always do. Then his father shifted the conversation. Daniel's been evaluating his next step, he said, cutting into his steak. We've been discussing where he can generate the most return over the next 5 years. A few nods around the table. One of the partners asked, staying internal or branching out? Likely internal for now, his father replied. Cleaner structure. Less risk. Then his mother added, casually, like she was commenting on the weather. Of course, alignment matters. You can't build long-term if one side is still finding its footing. I felt it immediately. That slight tightening in the room. The subtle shift of attention. Someone glanced at me. Then someone else. Daniel didn't say anything. I set my fork down carefully. Not loud. Not defensive. Just enough to create a pause. I actually signed a new client this week, I said. Calm. Direct. We're expanding into regional distribution optimization. It's scaling faster than I expected. There was a beat. Then his father smiled. Not warm. Not impressed. Measured. That's good, he said. But let's be honest, Elena. Early-stage contracts don't define stability. I held his gaze. They define traction. A quiet murmur at the table. Someone shifted in their seat. And then his mother leaned forward slightly, folding her hands together like she was about to clarify something important. We're not questioning your effort, she said. We're just looking at reality. Reality. There it was. Not implied. Stated. I felt every eye at the table settle in. I turned to Daniel. Just once. Waiting. He exhaled slowly, still not looking at me. They're just trying to be practical, he said. Practical. I remember the exact sound of the air conditioning unit kicking on above us. The low hum filling the silence that followed. And then his father said the line that ended it. We don't invest in people who don't generate returns. No one laughed. No one objected. Because it wasn't a joke. It was a decision. I sat there for 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Long enough to understand that this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a conclusion. I picked up my napkin, folded it once, and placed it beside my plate. I think I understand, I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me more than anything. Daniel finally looked at me then. Not with concern. Not with urgency. With calculation. Elena, don't make this bigger than it is, he said quietly. I stood up. It's already exactly what it is. His mother didn't stop me. His father didn't respond. And Daniel didn't move. I walked upstairs, into the guest room we had been using more than our own place lately. I remember opening the closet, pulling out my suitcase, and setting it on the bed. The zipper made that same quiet sound. Controlled. Final. I packed exactly what I had brought. No more, no less. When I came back downstairs, the conversation had resumed. Forks against plates. Glasses clinking. Like nothing had happened. Daniel met me near the hallway. You're overreacting, he said under his breath. No, I replied. I'm adjusting. He didn't follow me outside. Didn't call after me. Didn't even come to the door. I ordered an Uber. Black sedan. License plate I still remember for no reason, K72-9L. 3 minutes away. I stood on the curb in the cold, holding a suitcase and a phone that didn't ring. That should have been the lowest point. It wasn't. Because as the car pulled up and I placed my bag in the trunk, I realized something that mattered more than anything they had said inside that house. They thought they were removing a liability. What they didn't know was they had just disconnected themselves from the only person in that room who was actually building something scalable. For the first 2 weeks after that night, I didn't do anything dramatic. No calls. No messages. No long explanations trying to correct what had already been decided. I moved back into my apartment on West Belmont, unpacked my suitcase, and went back to work the next morning like nothing had happened. Because in a way, nothing had. Not structurally. That's the part people miss about moments like that. They feel final emotionally, but operationally, your life keeps moving unless you stop it. And I didn't stop. If anything, I got more precise. I remember the exact numbers from that month. 4 active clients. Total contracted revenue, $62,000 over 90 days. Operating costs, $11,400. Net position, tight but functional. Not impressive to them. But to me, it was a system proving itself. What they never understood, what they never even asked to understand, was how my business actually worked. I wasn't billing hours. I was building infrastructure. Every client I signed wasn't just a paycheck. It was data. Patterns. Repeatable frameworks I could refine and eventually scale across multiple accounts simultaneously. That's how you move from effort to leverage. But the real shift, the one that changed everything, happened about 6 weeks after I left. It started with an email. Subject line, contract clarification, urgent. It was from a mid-sized distribution company out of Indiana. One of my newer clients. They were having issues implementing the routing system I had designed, nothing unusual. Early stage friction. Except there was a name at the bottom of the forwarded thread that made me stop. Keller and Wright Holdings. I read it twice. Then a third time. Because Keller and Wright wasn't just any firm. It was the private equity group Daniel's father was partnered in. The same one that had spent that entire dinner talking about returns and alignment. The same one that had quietly acquired minority stakes in several regional distribution companies over the past 2 years. Including this one. I leaned back in my chair and pulled up the contract I had signed with the client. Every clause. Every term. Every line I had written myself. And there it was. Section 4.2, Operational Dependency Clause. Standard in my agreements. Or at least, standard for me. It stated that any system architecture I designed, routing models, cost frameworks, optimization algorithms, remained proprietary to my firm. The client had usage rights, not ownership. Meaning if they wanted to scale it, modify it, or integrate it across subsidiaries, they needed my approval. And my continued involvement. I opened another document, my internal notes from onboarding that client. Ownership structure, 38% stake held by Keller and Wright. Indirect control. Not full ownership. But enough to matter. I remember the exact moment it clicked. That quiet, almost physical shift in your mind when separate pieces of information align into something usable. Daniel's family had spent months, years, really, evaluating me as if I was an isolated variable. A single data point. What they didn't map out was how connected everything actually was. Because while they were measuring my visible income, they never looked at where my systems were being deployed. Or who depended on them. I didn't feel angry when I realized it. That's the part people expect. Some kind of emotional reaction. Satisfaction. Revenge. It wasn't that. It was clarity. Clean. Structured. Useful. I wasn't broke. I was early-stage infrastructure sitting inside multiple companies they either owned or were trying to scale. And more importantly, I had built it in a way that couldn't be extracted without me. That should have been the moment I called them. Explained it. Corrected the narrative. Repositioned myself. That's what most people would do. Fix the misunderstanding. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because I remembered something his father said that night. We don't invest in people who don't generate returns. So I looked at the situation the only way they would understand it. As an investment decision. And for the first time since I met them, I stopped trying to qualify. And started deciding. I didn't call them. That's the first thing people get wrong when they hear this part of the story. They expect a confrontation. A reveal. Some moment where I lay everything out and watch it land. I had no interest in that. Because once you understand where the leverage is, the goal isn't to announce it. It's to structure around it. So I went back to work. Not emotionally. Operationally. The first thing I did was review every active contract tied, directly or indirectly, to Keller and Wright Holdings. Not just the Indiana distributor. All of them. There were 3. 3 companies where my systems were embedded deeply enough that removing them would create friction. Not collapse, but friction is expensive at scale. I built a simple internal map. Ownership percentages. Contract renewal dates. Performance metrics. Dependency levels. Then I adjusted my agreements. Quietly. Every new contract moving forward included a refined version of Section 4.2. Tighter language. Clearer boundaries. Explicit clauses around multi-entity deployment and cross-subsidiary usage. Nothing aggressive. Just precise. Then I made one more change, subtle but important. I stopped offering flexibility. Before, I would adapt terms if a client hesitated. Extend timelines. Reduce upfront costs. I didn't do that anymore. Because I didn't need to. Within 3 months, my client base grew from 4 to 9. Within 6, I hired my first full-time analyst. Within 9, I moved out of the Belmont apartment into a small office space on West Loop. Nothing extravagant, exposed brick, 2 glass desks, a conference table that cost more than my first car. But it was mine. And the systems were working. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Because around that same time, I started noticing something else. Emails. Not directly from Daniel's family, but from people connected to them. Short. Professional. Carefully worded. Hi Elena, we've heard strong things about your optimization models. We're exploring potential efficiencies across our portfolio. Would you be open to discussing scalable deployment structures? They never mentioned Keller and Wright by name. They didn't need to. I recognized the pattern. Information was moving. Quietly. Someone had realized what I was building. And more importantly, where it was already embedded. I responded to those emails the same way every time. Happy to discuss. Please review attached proposal. No discounts. No explanations. Just terms. And then I waited. That's the part most people struggle with. Waiting. Not reacting to every signal. Not chasing validation. Not correcting narratives. Just letting the structure do what it was designed to do. Time passed. Contracts renewed. Systems expanded. And then, about 18 months after I left that house, I received something different. Not an email. An invitation. Heavy cardstock. Off-white. Gold-embossed lettering. Keller and Wright Holdings Annual Portfolio Strategy Summit. Location: the Langford Hotel. Same building. Different room. I remember holding that envelope for a few seconds longer than necessary. Because this wasn't outreach. This was acknowledgement. Not personal. Strategic. They weren't inviting me because they cared about me. They were inviting me because they needed what I controlled. That distinction matters. I didn't respond immediately. I waited 2 days. Then I had my assistant send a reply. Ms. Voss will attend. Please confirm speaking slot availability. No explanation. No emotion. Just positioning. That summit led to 3 new contracts. 2 of them directly tied to Keller and Wright portfolio companies. Long-term agreements. Multi-year scalability. By the end of year 2, my firm wasn't early stage anymore. We were infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't ask to be included. It becomes necessary. That should have been the moment they reached out directly. Daniel. His parents. Someone. They didn't. Not once. No apology. No acknowledgement. Nothing. Which told me something important. They still didn't understand what had happened. They thought this was coincidence. Market movement. Timing. Not structure. So I let them keep thinking that. And I kept building. By year 3, we had 22 active contracts. 8-figure total value across multi-year agreements. A team of 11. And enough visibility in the industry that we were no longer optional in certain conversations. That's when I decided to host the gala. Not as a celebration. As a signal. Location secured, Langford Hotel Ballroom. Guest list, curated. Exact. Every name reviewed twice. Every access point controlled. Because when you build something long enough, carefully enough, you eventually reach a point where you don't have to ask where you stand. You get to decide who does. And what they didn't know was that their position in that structure had already been defined. By 8:40 p.m., the room had settled into its rhythm. Conversations layered over soft music. Glasses refilled without asking. Names I had only seen on contracts now standing in small circles, discussing expansion timelines like they'd always been part of the same system. This is what scale looks like when it's real. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just inevitable. I was standing near the stage, reviewing a final set of numbers on my phone, Q4 projections, 2 pending renewals, when I heard the shift. It's subtle, but once you've been in enough rooms like that, you recognize it immediately. Attention redirecting. A break in flow. I didn't turn right away. I already knew. One of my operations managers approached me quietly. "They're still at the entrance," she said. "Security's holding them." I nodded once. "Keep it that way." She hesitated for half a second. "They're asking again." "Your name specifically." Of course they were. Because by now, they had figured it out. Not all of it. But enough. I walked toward the entrance, not rushed, not hesitant. Just steady. The same way I had walked toward that door 3 years ago, except this time I wasn't hoping to be accepted. I was already in control. They saw me before I reached them. My mother-in-law straightened slightly, like posture could recover something already lost. My father-in-law's expression was tighter now, less controlled than before. Daniel just stood there, hands at his sides, eyes fixed on me like he was trying to calculate distance he couldn't cross. "We didn't realize," his mother said immediately, voice low but urgent. "Elena, we didn't know." I stopped a few feet away. Close enough to hear them clearly. Not close enough to invite anything else. My father-in-law stepped forward. "Your company. The contracts. The integration across the portfolio." He chose his words carefully. That was new. I watched him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "You mean the infrastructure your firms have been using for the last 18 months? Silence. Because now we were speaking the same language. Daniel finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him, really looked this time. Same question he should have asked 3 years ago. "Tell you what?" I said calmly. "That I generate returns?" That landed exactly where it needed to. My mother-in-law's voice broke slightly. "We made a mistake." There it was. Not denial. Not deflection. A statement. I let it sit for a second. Then I said the only thing that actually mattered. "You didn't make a mistake," I said. "You made a decision." No one argued. Because they couldn't. Behind me, the doors to the ballroom opened briefly as a guest stepped out, letting light and sound spill into the hallway, laughter, music, movement. Everything they weren't part of. My father-in-law cleared his throat. "We need to talk about the Midwest distribution expansion," he said, shifting back into the only framework he understood. "There are dependencies we weren't fully aware of. If we can sit down, privately, we can restructure terms that make sense for everyone." There it was. Not family. Not reconciliation. Terms. I almost respected that. Almost. I held his gaze for a moment, then shook my head slightly. There's nothing to restructure tonight, I said. His expression tightened. Elena, this affects multiple entities. If access to your systems becomes restricted. It won't, I said, cutting in gently. Not unless contracts are breached. I let that line settle. Because it mattered. I wasn't there to destroy anything. I was there to define it. Daniel took a step closer. Then what do you want? He asked. Simple question. Late. I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth wasn't something you rush. I want exactly what I've already built, I said finally. Clear agreements. Defined boundaries. No assumptions. My mother-in-law's eyes filled slightly. And us? That question wasn't strategic. It was personal. I considered it for a moment. Not emotionally. Accurately. You're not part of this structure, I said. Not cruel. Not cold. Just true. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. Because everyone standing there understood exactly what they meant. Access denied wasn't about the door behind me. It was about everything beyond it. I turned to the security guard. Thank you, I said. You can clear the entrance. He nodded immediately. Professional. Efficient. And just like that, the moment was over. No raised voices. No scene. Just 3 people standing outside a system they hadn't taken seriously until they needed it. I walked back into the ballroom without looking behind me. The music hadn't stopped. The conversations hadn't paused. Because rooms like that don't revolve around moments. They revolve around structure. Later that night, around 11:30, I stepped outside onto the hotel terrace for some air. Chicago in winter has a way of making everything feel sharper. Cleaner. I could see the reflection of the ballroom lights in the glass behind me. Movement. Energy. Something fully built. 3 years ago, I stood outside a different house, holding a suitcase, waiting for someone to choose me. Tonight, I wasn't waiting for anything. That's the difference. Not money. Not status. Position. I checked my phone once more, 2 new emails. 1 contract confirmation. 1 inquiry from a new client. Work continuing. As it should. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and exhaled slowly, watching the breath disappear into the cold air. They thought they were removing a liability. What they actually did was remove themselves from the only part of my life they could have belonged to. And the truth is, by the time they realized that, there was nothing left to take back.